The Sattler Files.
You're with the Sattler Files. My name is Murray Corf, and with me is, from Stratosfear, Jamie Holroyd. G'day, Jamie.
How are you, Murray?
I'm very well, thank you. And Jamie joins us, and we talk a lot about business and consultancy and business fixing and repairing and all of that sort of stuff.
Yeah, well, speaking of which, Murray, that last week we've moved into these new studios here, which are fantastic. So
Yes.
which is great, and I thought I'd had some downtime to myself. I've got an extra day in my week, without this regular commitment, and I got called up for jury duty. You wouldn't believe it. So.
Isn't that just the way that things go sometimes?
Well, look, it was interesting. Last week we had the topic, we're talking about people, and we'll continue that topic this week. But being stuck on a jury with 12 other people was a good reflection for me to see that often people have multiple perspectives on things, and you can sit there and try as hard as you might, and sometimes you just cannot understand where people are coming from. And the case that I was involved with, without going into all the details, but it seemed fairly straightforward. There was a complete sort of lack of evidence, and clearly 10 people on the jury agreed that there was no evidence, and 2 other people had a different perspective. And it was interesting for me, particularly in a business context and a political context, that often, as well as you might argue your case, as compelling as you might think it is, that you just have to accept that sometimes there's going to be a small percentage of people who are never ever going to see it your way. And I suppose that really comes down to the whole traditional paradigm of the unions versus business. You're not ever going to really get 100% agreement on things.
No, indeed not. Do you think that's partly because people have a preconceived idea, or do they about an outcome, or just by perhaps not taking notice of the evidence as opposed to having a preconceived idea about somebody?
Yeah, look, I think everyone, any business is just made up of people, and everybody's shaped by their experience. So depending on the experiences that you've seen over time, it is going to shape your beliefs, and sometimes those beliefs are very deep in their conviction and will take an enormous amount to change them. And that doesn't mean that people don't, and they don't over time. And maybe the people we are when we're younger are not the people we are when we're older. But often it's very, very difficult. And it's a really interesting point is how much time and effort do you invest in trying to change
convince people and that sort of thing. Yeah,
you see even with the politicians, a good politician sometimes just accept that some people are never going to agree with them. So
yeah. On social media, it's really interesting sometimes as well, talking about politicians, that some people, either it's the politician's problem for not explaining it properly, or it's people who have a preconceived idea and refuse to see the correct way or the way it was intended. A lot of people, and it must be very frustrating for politicians, when they think they've explained the message really well, and yet people still have a completely wrong idea of exactly what's being talked about.
Yeah, now I think sometimes too, whether it's social media or talk about radio, you never know who's a genuine caller and who's a political hack pretending to be one. And
quite right. That's very true.
I do recall too that the often it's the way things start that sets the tone, and you might recall that there was the infamous grandmother after the Tony Abbott budget in 2014.
Yeah, the wink.
And the bit that kind of got lost was that lady actually used to work for Kevin Rudd, right? But the story had grown a narrative of its own, and then become impossibly difficult to change. So obviously lots of that sort of thing goes on, and it's no different in business. You have to control the narrative, and so the poor old dairy farmers and the supermarkets caught in that sort of war at the moment as to what is the underlying principle here, and who's right and who's wrong. So.
Just with the dairy farmers, I mean that's something that's really quite serious, isn't it?
Oh yeah, especially if you're a dairy farmer, yeah, for sure.
But for the overall economy as well, I mean,
I think that look, often in business you get these moments where you get the opportunity to recheck and recalibrate. What do you actually believe? What do you actually think? Right, so. We believe in competition. We believe in a fair market. We end up in a circumstance where farmers have typically overinvested in an industry where they don't have enough channels to market. So typically they become price takers, not price makers. So normally you're selling a good, you set the price.
Yes.
And the other person decides whether they want to buy it. In this case, we've got the reverse, where it's the buyer who's setting the price and the poor old farmer is the price taker. Now, the issue then becomes, the government gets involved because obviously it's a fairly significant sort of social issue for the farmers and for the community who want to make sure that we, maintain that market and that industry. Now, if the government comes in and bails people out, who are we actually benefiting, right? Are we benefiting the farmer? Are we allowing the supplier the opportunity to sort of get away with that? And this has been an issue over time where firms with really significant market power use it, and it actually comes to the detriment of their suppliers, which ultimately comes to the detriment of their business, right? And it's this classic case of short-term thinking versus long-term prosperity. So it's not a new phenomenon; it happens all the time. So.
Yeah.
But my favourite one at the moment, Murray, and any listeners out there who I stand to be corrected, but I understand that all the local brand milks are all selling out in the supermarket. So you've got all the Coles and Woolworths milk sitting there, and all the others are sold out, but my understanding is it all comes from the same supplier. So the only person you're really benefiting by buying the more expensive milk is actually the supermarket, not the farmer. So.
That's very distressing to learn that, because I think people are quite genuine in their desire to help, aren't they? Because somewhere along the line they've been told that the branded milk as opposed to the non-branded milk will help the farmers more, but you're saying that that's not the case?
My understanding is it's not the case. And I had this conversation with my father-in-law just the other day, and said, well, even symbolically, it's a message to the farmers to say, we care for you and we're trying to help where we can. So.
Yeah. That's very, very disturbing. But, in an election year, it is an election year for both, well, not quite for the state, but certainly for the federal people. They wouldn't want to see this go on for too long, would they?
No. Well, look, it's sort of might put some excitement into the election campaign.
Because so far it's been pretty ordinary, hasn't it?
Yeah, well, I kind of feel like the elections always turn into a reverse auction, right? Normally it's about who's going to spend what on what, and now it's who's going to spend the least.
Who can unspend?
Yeah, well, look, it's makes it pretty unexciting when you don't have much money to spend and don't really have much to talk about. So
yeah. That's right.
But the surprise for me, and we'll sort of tie these all back to the sort of people issues we want to talk about, but I suppose the big surprise out of the election so far is there hasn't been any real critical issues. So I think that's why people are quite happy for it to go on. Obviously, it's a long campaign, but I think the surprise, from my perspective at least, is Bill Shorten seems to be doing pretty well, in terms of campaigning. And one of the things in business we talk about is that what they call the 10,000 hours test, right? So if you do 10,000 hours of anything, you typically build competence, become an expert. And it's been a little bit under the radar, but I understand that Bill Shorten's been doing a lot of sort of school hall, town hall type presentations over the last year. And so when it's come to the election, he looks pretty ready and he feels pretty ready. And he's probably holding his own with Malcolm Turnbull reasonably well, mainly just not from a policy perspective, but just from a general presentation and perception. I think that's been the big surprise. So,
look, I'd agree with you, particularly given that probably when Malcolm Turnbull took over from Tony Abbott, Bill Shorten was perceived as being almost unelectable, that he didn't have a profile, and the profile that he had was all about all sorts of things quite remote from politics. But now it seems as though his work is starting to pay off, because he is seen as a viable alternative now to, although if you look at the polls, Malcolm Turnbull is by far and away the most preferred Prime Minister, but nonetheless Shorten is improving every time you see a poll, and so is his party.
Yeah, and this is an interesting concept. Someone said to me once, why were the Beatles so good, right? So why were the Beatles so successful? Now, there's a whole bunch of reasons. Maybe they were new, maybe they were innovative. But one of the answers was, they'd passed the 10,000 hours test. They'd actually gone to Germany and used to do all those gigs in Hamburg and doing them every single night. And so they actually had that sort of 10,000 hours of competence before they became an overnight sensation. And this is really important for business people, that if you think you're going to buy a restaurant or start a business and you're going to take off and immediately you're going to be successful and immediately you're going to be competitive with people who've been doing it for a long time, the reality is you're probably not going to be. You don't have the skills or experience, and you probably haven't built up the resources. So you have to understand, in business there's going to be a logical progression towards that best practice competence. And often it's where businesses come unstuck is people overestimate their skills and how successful they're going to be in the short term. You have to prepare for a long haul of a couple of years in terms of, building that competence and making sure you can compete. And also you always have those, what we call the abnormal problems. So there's the normal problems of being in business, like, cash flow and learning and staff not turning up. The things that you can predict might be an issue. Then you have the abnormal problems. So the abnormal problems for me at the moment has been I unexpectedly got called up on jury duty.
Yes.
The case didn't go for the 2 days it was planned. It went for a whole week.
Yeah.
At the same time, with the storms, we had some flood damage in our house. So suddenly we've got all these external issues to deal with when you still have to try and run the business at the same time.
Yeah, yeah. And so unexpected things. I mean, can we touch briefly on the gotcha moment for Julie Bishop with Neil Mitchell, where she was asked about the transition to retirement policy of the Liberal Party, and she wasn't able to answer it. And she, to her everlasting credit, owned up to the fact, well, I know we have one, but I'm not familiar with the intimate details. Now, that was unexpected. She wasn't expecting the question. Do you think that they should all know everybody's portfolio? Do you think that it was a fair gotcha moment?
Oh, look, I think with all these things, and the listeners will be used to me saying by now that the truth's always somewhere in the middle. And do we reasonably expect that any person, any profession has all the answers 100% of the time? I suppose what you're looking for in those gotcha moments is how do you handle it, right? So you say, listen, I don't expect that this is the policy that Julie Bishop's going to run with, but how, she's going to have a significant role in the government. How is she going to, what confidence do we have in her, and how's she going to communicate things? So, I mean, that's really the test. I was thinking about this just the other day, actually, that years ago it used to be that under an election scenario that significant pressure comes on, right? And during that significant pressure, one candidate rises above the other, and you say, look, this person's not ready. And I do recall at one stage John Howard had one or two slip-ups early on,
yes,
right?
I remember those.
And you think that's the intensity of the pressure. And it's kind of like the US election campaign. It goes for a long, long time, but over time you say, well, only a person who can sustain all that would actually be successful in the long run, despite what people might think of the merits of the various candidates. But I was thinking more recently is that when Kevin Rudd got elected, he was a novice, and for someone like myself, you expect that this person's going to have issues. And I really didn't expect him to get elected because I thought he probably would crack under the pressure of the election campaign. But what I think's probably changed now is with social media and with the constant 24-hour media cycle, the difference between normal time and election time is probably not that great.
No.
And it's probably why people don't have that much interest in the campaign at the moment, because it's just situation normal. So.
That's right. You wouldn't really, unless you were paying close attention, really understand that they were in fact in campaign mode. We're talking to Jamie Holroyd from Stratosphere about business and all sorts of other issues associated with that. But the election is going to take up a lot of our time, and it's something that, does business get really nervous about election campaigns, or do they just wait and see? Oh, look,
I think the answer is yes and no. So the no answer is, well, it doesn't matter who gets elected, you still got to run your business.
Quite right. Yes.
So you just have to deal with what comes and make the best of it. And people always predict, if one or the other party gets elected, it's going to be the end of the world. And the truth is, it never really is.
No.
Business and the economy is pretty flexible, pretty nimble, so it learns to adapt. So, but there also are significant issues. So we've talked over recent weeks about the negative gearing.
Yes.
If I'm a business person and I'm looking to, make some tax planning, am I going to buy an investment property now or not? Am I going to rush and buy it now, or am I going to wait? If I buy this property and it's grandfathered, so it is subject to negative gearing, does it mean I'll never sell it? All right.
Yes.
If I buy it, and if it's only subject to new properties under construction, does that mean as soon as I buy it, when I sell it, becomes second hand, therefore nobody wants it, right? So there are a lot of complex issues, and also people planning for retirement. So often the polarity of policy initiatives in a campaign becomes less so after the campaign. So, for example, the GST, when it was brought in, it got watered down, right? And so typically what you hear in a campaign is not always what you're going to end up with either. So,
yeah. So basically what you're saying is that businesses do have to run regardless of who's in power, and maybe waiting for something is not necessarily always a good thing.
Yeah, and look, I think the thing especially under the last term of government, so under the Labor government, it had become prone to making just surprise announcements, right? So the banning of the live cattle
live
export
exports,
trade for a while, solar initiatives that stopped and started or ran out, and it's an upheaval for business, particularly when you've got long-term planning and significant capital investment. And you have to be wary that if a change of government policy can have that much impact on your business, then you probably need to do some risk management planning around your business. So,
yeah. But nonetheless, we've still got all this time now between now and 3rd of June. 3rd of July to make our planning, and it's not that long, is it?
No, not at all. So, but I've said this many times that we talk about policy and we talk about strategy in the government, but often the biggest uplift in most businesses really comes from people and good people management. So, and most businesses underinvest in people. They underinvest in training.
Right?
Yeah, definitely. And I think what happens is you just get too busy. People are too busy doing stuff. They're doing the immediate issues, and they don't spend enough time, planning and developing staff, particularly.
So perhaps working in the business rather than on it.
Yeah, which has become a bit of a catch-cry phrase, but it's absolutely true. So and if you can't get the best people, then you have to build them. And building the best people takes a long time, and it takes a significant investment in time. We talked in our last episode about the difference between important and urgent, and building staff is important, but it's not urgent. Now, when you can do something tomorrow can run for many years.
That's right. Yes, we'll do it a bit later, but the reality is you have to get started on something like building your people, don't you? At some point you have to start. Yeah.
And look, another failing that people have is sometimes they get the best staff and then they don't know how to use them, right? And so if you've gone out and you made a pitch and you've pinched the best people from your competitor, and then maybe you don't spend enough time with them, maybe you don't spend enough time listening to them. I'm going to give you a classic example, and we always use political or sporting examples because they're ones that people are familiar with. But under the Kevin Rudd era, which was quite ironic that Kevin Rudd was basically elected on this industrial relations platform, but there was all these stories about staff who were made to work all night, all night, and then they'd prepare papers and they'd give it to him and he wouldn't read them.
Yes.
And that's incredibly deflating. You say, what am I doing here? I suddenly don't feel valued. And, the way to get staff to make discretionary effort is what we're all after, as they put in as much as they can, is to make sure that people feel valued. And that feeling valued might be saying, well, Murray did a great job today. It might be as simple as that, but often people forget to do it. So.
Yeah, they do. And the discretionary time that people spend really has to be done not because people feel as though they have to do it, but more because they want to do it to succeed. Yeah,
people exert discretionary effort because they've got buy-in. They've got buy-in with the company. They believe with what's being done. People are aligned and they believe in the cause, and so they want to participate as much as they can. So,
on the other side of that coin, what about underutilising good people? I mean, that can be equally distressing for them as well, can't it?
Oh, definitely. I'm not sure to say a family member, a relative. I don't want to get them in trouble, but was in the army, right? Fairly senior person in the army, and he got designated to a specific project. Clearly, there was some political shenanigans going on, and the project just wasn't doing anything, right? And so, he actually suffered quite badly from stress of having to go to work, saying, I'm supposed to be working on this project. My bosses basically stonewalled the project. Now I've got this real conflict, do I feel comfortable to go to work and get paid, or do I feel comfortable that I'm in this position that maybe I need to report on my boss to his superior, and it actually becomes quite distressing. So, but if you have good people typically like to be fully engaged.
Indeed,
right? So
they do.
I don't know too many AFL players or tennis players who want to skip rounds, or they want to be out there all the time
and not turn up to training and all that sort of stuff. Yeah. So that it is important that in selecting the people that you have in mind for them, something that is going to fulfill them. Yeah, and often what tends to happen in business is business is very dynamic and things move very quickly, and we need some staff members. So we rush to employ someone, right? We meet someone, they'll do, square peg, rectangle hole, they'll fit, right? Don't worry about that, they'll fit. Yeah.
And, there might be a lack of, we haven't done enough assessment to make sure the person's suitable for the role. And maybe they've got most of the attributes, but not all of them. And often too, we might have really poor job design, so the person's not sure about what's required. Can the work be done in 8 hours a day?
Yes.
Or have we employed someone for 8 hours and they've only got 2 hours of work? The other thing is maybe they don't have the skills and experience. Maybe we thought they had the skills and experience, but because we don't know enough about it, we employed the wrong person. So a classic would be someone who's in the IT industry. Now, one IT professional might not be another. We meet someone and say, well, he's got a really good, strong IT background, but what we're asking him to do is, set up the hardware. Maybe they're a software specialist. Right?
Yes.
So because of our lack of knowledge and understanding, we hire the wrong person, and then we say, geez, this person's hopeless, right? And then we fire them. But the real problem was us, right? Us who hired them.
We made the mistake in employing them in the first instance.
Yeah.
What about recurrent training on things? How is that part of the building process for your staff?
Oh, look, I think that, for any business, not too many businesses are static. Training is just an ongoing, and, there's formal training, there's informal training. But I think particularly in this day and age is that things change so quickly. I mean, you can spend a significant amount of time building skills and resources in certain expertise, which becomes redundant really quickly these days. So,
yes, of course you can, particularly the way that technology advances.
Yeah, definitely.
So you training should be an ongoing thing. Is it part of the satisfaction in a job where people go into a job and then they're retrained at the expense of the company? Is that something that is part of their satisfaction in their job?
One of the big things is that most businesses in the past have tended to think that we'll get the best staff and motivate staff by paying them a lot. Now, staff necessarily, I'm sure if you ask them, they'll say they'd like to be paid more, but necessarily aren't engaged just by money. So
No.
I'll give an example, Murray. If I paid you, a ridiculous amount of money to cut my lawn, but I said do it with a pair of scissors, no matter how much I paid you, you're going to get to the point where you go, man, I just can't stand this anymore, right?
No.
This is really unproductive and unrewarding.
And there's much better ways of doing it.
But if I said to you, look, here's a way to do it, or if I trained you, or if I gave you new skills, that's what people actually find engaging because they feel like they're part of something. They also feel valued. So they do contribute that discretionary effort. So.
And they also feel as though they're gaining more knowledge and more experience, and you've heard the expression so often, it looks great on the CV.
Yeah. And, often with training, well, who's going to do it? Is someone external going to do it? Have we got the resources internally to do it? So one of the things that we like to do with our clients is we have a lot of client work that we can do remotely, but one thing that's good, it's good to actually sit in the client's office, hear the banter that goes on, see the people are involved, and you start to pick up a lot that you wouldn't understand about the business otherwise, which is we think it's one of our real strengths in terms of the hands-on time that we actually spend with the clients.
Do you feel when you walk into a business that and looking around at the people, some of them are walking around with round shoulders and looking at the floor and all that sort of stuff. And is that the sort of thing that you look at when you start working with a business? Yeah.
Well, as I said, most businesses live and die by the people, right? Now, the people with the round shoulders, as you describe them, they're clearly not engaged, right? So we have a fairly simple matrix that we use, and we rank people on it. And what it does is it segments people into different quadrants, and then we can say, look, these are the people who are an issue at the moment. So, how do we engage them? How do we upskill them? Can we upskill them? Can we get them to give that discretionary effort? Can we get them engaged, right?
Yeah.
Now, the answer might be that a lot of those people exist because of the issues we talked about before, where we just had poor recruitment. So we didn't have proper recruitment places in place, and we brought the wrong people into the organisation. So.
But just because they're not engaged, the way that you handle it is to see if it's possible to get them engaged and see if it's possible to bring them up to speed, as a lot of people talk about. Is that a valid approach, or is it much better to just start again?
Oh, look, the truth is always somewhere in the middle. So you need to work out what you got. If you've got someone who clearly doesn't have the intellect or the skills, then you might have to make some hard calls. But if you've got someone who's just been neglected, maybe they weren't given the right resources or the right training, and they're clearly intelligent and they clearly want to be in this field, then it's a different proposition. So, but there is no one size fits all. Yeah. So.
No. Well, that's the benefit of having someone like yourself come into a business and have a look, and see what is going on in there. Because so often, and we've said it just a moment ago, you work in the business and not on it, and you can't see the wood for the trees, and all sorts of things are going on around you that you don't even see.
The great thing in our business, we had a great little team, but the thing that works well for us is we have a really good collaborative spirit, right? So one of my colleagues might bring a concept or a model or an idea to myself, and I'll look at it and, get really engaged with it, say, well, this is really interesting. And they'll bring me stuff that they know I find interesting. Then I'll say, well, with this concept, what we could do is we could add on this, this and this, right? Then I give it back to them, right?
Right.
And then they build on that, and suddenly you've got a really good collaborative relationship. Now, we hear a lot about collaboration. I'm not sure that people actually understand what we mean when we talk about collaboration, but I think in our group is that we're all similar enough but different enough that we're similar enough that we can all understand where everyone's coming from, and we're different enough that we can bring a slightly different perspective to each piece of work that we're actually working on. We have an absence of sort of competition amongst our team, so no one's trying to outdo each other. Our intrinsic motivator is really in the learning, right? So we really get off when someone goes, here's a concept we haven't thought about before, or here's an idea we haven't thought about before.
Of course.
What, this would be really applicable to our clients. What we try and do is we're always trying to get complex ideas and break them down into really simple, matrix or platform or something. So most of the concepts we work with, we want to get them on the one page. If we can't get them on the one page, it's probably too complex, for the client to pick up and run with. So we've got to take a lot of complexity and then, do a lot of work on it and then make it really simple. So
yeah, I remember very well a man that I used to work for called Kerry Packer. You may have heard from him.
Yeah, I've heard of him.
If you couldn't put the concept down on one page, you'd lost him.
Yeah.
Because he just believed that he was an intelligent man and all he needed was one page. And if you couldn't explain it in one page, then it wasn't worth it.
Yeah.
And he'd throw it out.
And look, this is a great thing for, someone like Kerry Packer is a sort of ultimate example, is you've got a CEO. He's got a lot on his mind. He's got, enormous intellectual capacity, but he can't be dealing with everything. So if it can't be broken down simply, then probably it's not going to work.
No, well, that I think was his view normally, and he and we all learned that brevity was the answer to get what you wanted out of him.
Well, I think the thing that's important is that, from a business owner's perspective, that the business owner needs to have confidence in the staff, and the staff need to have confidence in the business owner too. So often that comes from being really genuine. So.
Yes, yeah. All right, Jamie, well, thank you very much for spending some time with us today. It's been very interesting as always, and we look forward to catching up with you again next week.
All right, great. Thanks, Murray.
More on the Sattler File shortly.
This is the Sattler File.